Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. They're all big, but this is a big one. We have one of my friends in the house, Stephanie Fowler. Welcome, Stephanie.
Well, thank you so much for having me in. I appreciate it.
Well, I've known you a lot of years, and over those years, one thing that you've been really good at is writing. You're kind of a writer person.
You know, I've always felt like a writer. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, from the time I was like 6 years old, I started writing. I even worked for you at the Daily Times. Surprised you hired me, but you did. And I worked for you an entire summer, and that was the summer before I won the Sophie Kerr Prize. And I will never forget, like the day after I won, like the Daily Times paper came out, and you had this thing in there where you're like, I knew we had talent here. And I was like, so I thought that was a fantastic moment.
You were at Washington College. You were
Yes.
a student. You won the Sophie Kerr Prize, and that's a big deal.
It is the largest undergraduate literary award in the country, and I honestly did not think I would win it, but I put together a collection of short stories about the Eastern Shore. My style is creative nonfiction. I'm more of an essayist, short story writer, and I put this collection together and did not think that I would win because I knew the kids, the other students that I was going up against, and I knew how talented they were. And so when they announced me as the winner that year, no one was more surprised than I was that day.
But it'll always be with you. Like the
Yes.
first paragraph of every news story about you forever will say that you were a Sophie Kerr Prize winner.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's it's one of those things. It's it's certainly when you sort of look back at your life. For me, it's always going to be like one of my top five days of my life. I mean, it was a pretty incredible moment, and it has certainly meant a lot to me in my life, and in continuing to write and push forward, and write books and continuing to be a writer. But it's just a really great kind of jumping off point for me.
Well, that's why we have you, and you've written a book. Show us the book.
So this is my new book. It was published about a year ago, Chasing Alice, How the Life, Murder, and Legacy of an English Teacher Changed the Delmarva Community. And unfortunately, this is a true story. I was born and raised here in Salisbury and went to Parkside High School. And in the 96-97 school year, I had Alice Davis as my English teacher. I took AP English with her. And she was just a very incredibly special person to me. She saw that I loved to write, and she saw that I loved to read, and she really encouraged and nurtured those aspirations in me. But also, I was kind of going through kind of a tough time personally, and she was like the one person who noticed that I was really struggling, and she kind of took me under her wing. So she became a writing mentor as well as kind of like a life mentor. She became a person that I could talk to and I could really kind of express myself to in a way that I really couldn't with other people. And then also, I love to write, and so she saw that, but she was kind of tough on me in that way. Like every time I would write something, it would come back with like red ink all over it, where she had kind of torn it to pieces. So she really challenged me and nurtured me, and then I won Sophie Kerr Prize. She was the first person I called.
Wow.
When I got home that night, I went to we had phone books, and I went to the phone book and I looked up her number and I called her because I didn't want her to hear about it on the news or in the Daily Times. I wanted her to hear about it from me. And so I called and told her, and she was really excited for me. And she asked me to come back and talk to her students. And so we kind of kept in a little bit of touch that way. And then over the Labor Day holiday of 2011, 10 years ago, she was murdered by her husband. And that was something that really affected me and really impacted me. And I don't know, there was so much about it that just stayed with me. And so about 6 years ago, actually 7 years ago, it was like in 2014, I decided that I wanted to write about it, because that's always been my way as a writer. When something happens to me, it's not until I write about it that I really feel like I understand it. Okay, here's how I feel about this experience. This is what this meant to me. It's kind of getting all that kind of stuff out of my head and onto the page. And so I decided that I would try to write this story, and I reached out to her family, her sister, Barry Tillman.
Yeah, her sister was the mayor.
Absolutely, Barry Tillman. And so I reached out to her, and I've kind of felt like if the family was had no interest in it, then I would sort of do that. But I met with Barry, and she was really very candid. She was very open. And so that kind of started the process of deciding to write this story. And I went through several drafts of it, went through some editing, did some work on it, and it was finally put together and published this time last year.
And one of the things it's done is other people who were touched by her have come forward, certainly through social media, and told their stories about how Alice also impacted their lives. So it's really grown her legacy.
I hope so. I mean, I did a book club several months ago over Zoom, and there was a woman in the book club. I didn't recognize her, I didn't know her, but she had been one of Alice's students, and she said to me, we're on this book club Zoom meeting, and she just burst into tears, and she started talking about how when she was in high school, she had a very difficult experience too, and she was having trouble with her family, and guidance counselor came to her and said, well, we have to tell a responsible adult about some of these things that are, kind of putting an informed adult in this situation. And she said, I asked them, could you just tell Mrs. Davis? And so there are other, I'm not special in terms of the fact that she took me under her wing. I'm not special in that at all. I mean, as this book came out, there have been so many other people that have said, I went into teaching because of her. I continued to be a writer because she encouraged me to keep being a writer. There are people who just have all these stories of being touched by her. And that was one of the things that I felt was going to get lost. When I would mention her name to people would say, oh, wasn't that teacher that got murdered? And that's not who she was to me.
Right.
And
Right.
So I just felt like no one was going to know the kindness and the incredible stuff that I knew. And I just didn't want that to get lost, the Google searches. I think about my worst day on this earth. And if I thought that day was going to be my Google search results, I'd be mortified. And so I just wanted because I just wanted people to know more about her. And so I've done book clubs. There was a teachers group in Anne Arundel County that read the book, and there's a whole bunch of there's 20 people there who would not have known her but knew her now. So I'm hopeful that the book stands to her legacy and to what she meant to her students and to her friends and to her family and those sorts of things.
I know at the newspaper at the time when it happened, it's one of those things where you want to cover the story, but you don't want to sensationalize it.
Right.
And because the mayor was involved, I guess she was the former mayor at that time,
Yes.
Jim Ireton was the mayor. But I remember when Alice went missing, and everything happened very fast, and I called Barry, and I was like, is there anything we can do? And she said, Greg, he killed her. And I was like, who? And the husband's name, and I can't remember.
Jess.
He killed her. And I'm like, Barry, let's not jump to conclusions. She's like, Greg, we always knew he was going to kill her. I mean, she was adamant about that in a way that, go ahead and put it in the paper that he killed her, but he was also missing at the time. So things had happened. So I just remember being kind of traumatized about how to cover this story, and someone who, I had a professional relationship, but also liked the mayor, what she was going through.
Oh, absolutely. And it was interesting that it wasn't just Barry. The other women in Alice's life, her friends, other family members, other teachers she worked with, and even neighbors and things, that when they found out she was missing, their first thought was him. Yeah. So Barry certainly wasn't alone in that feeling, but it was hard. And when you write a book like this, the thing that I felt like I tried to balance was I didn't want to be like, oh, here's all the gory details, here's all the terrible inside stuff. I wanted very much to try to put a portrait of Alice, who she was as a person, who she was as a teacher, what she meant to her students, how people miss her and love her, and how they remember her. So I very much didn't want it to just be sort of a sordid true crime story. I wanted it to be more of a narrative of who she was. And also, in the book I do talk about the dangers of domestic violence. I talk about, some mental health issues. And so I felt I had a responsibility to be as sensitive to Alice and to her family and to her friends, because I didn't want to write this to re-traumatize. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to say, hey, here was this incredible person that I knew, and something terrible happened to her, and we should all pay attention to that.
What kind of person was she? Because I know Barry, I didn't know her.
So Alice was a bit quieter than Barry, and so I had her as a student. So this is sort of my take, but she was incredibly smart. She was so intelligent. She had this very dry, quick wit that would it would come at you, She was very much in command of her classroom, which is one of the things that sort of becomes obvious in the book is that as much control and command as she had in the classroom, that was kind of not always the case in her personal life. But she was very kind. She was very sensitive. It was almost, there was one teacher that said, I knew my material and tried to connect my material to my students. Alice was the other way. She connected to her kids and then used that connection to her kids to get them to understand the material, which is a much harder way to go. But, she was very engaging. She was very warm, and, she was not a perfect person, but the person that I got to know was an adult who basically said, I recognize what's going on with you and I'm going to help you. And that takes a pretty special person, because there's a lot of people that be like, oh, that kid's got some stuff going on. I'll just, kind of do this number. But that wasn't her. If she saw a problem, she looked at it, and she was just very special. I could probably keep going, but she just was kind, intelligent, funny, and she had an amazing laugh, and she was just a really great person. Growing up public school, we got the Scarlet Letter, we got the Crucible, we got the Good Earth, and when you're like a teenager, you're like, oh my gosh. But Alice recognized that I loved to write, and she was the one who put I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. She put that book in my hands, and that moment felt sort of like, it was revelatory.
It's a life-changing book for so many people.
For so many people, and I was one of them, because I read that, and I was like, wait, this is how we can write? Right. This is something that can be a thing?
And when I read that book, I don't get it at all. But like my daughter, when she reads it, she cries every time.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, my wife, it's my favorite book, and my wife actually got me a legitimate signed copy by Maya Angelou.
Wow.
And it's like one of my treasures. It's just such a phenomenal book. And, for a kid who loved to write and kind of going through some things on my own, and then she puts that book in my hand. It was like I was in a dark room, and then boom, the lights came on. And it was that, she was that kind of a teacher, she could connect you with something that would inspire you, and then you look back and it's like, wow, that connection really happened through her. And she was like that with so many of her students. And that was the thing that I just wanted people to know, that there are writers and journalists and, publishers and, teachers and lawyers and the stuff that are all kind of moving about the world now, and look back and go, yeah, Mrs. Davis was really fundamental and really pushed me in a way that gave me confidence. One lady said, I thought I had value because she thought I had value. And I thought that was so,
wow.
I thought that was so impactful that, that we all got to, she loved us,
Yeah. Had she, I've lost track, had she retired yet? Or
no,
was she was still teaching when
I believe
she was killed?
She was entering her 28th year of teaching.
Okay.
It was, and they had only had like 5 days with her new group of students.
Right.
And, and that was one of the interesting things. I spoke with another teacher at Parkside, and they said, even though those kids had only had 5 hours with her, an hour a day for that week prior.
It was this time of year.
It was this time of year, back to school, everybody's figuring stuff out. And they said those kids, even though they had only had an hour with her, there were kids that were just heartbroken and cried, because they were like, well, we really liked her, like what's going on? And so I think she just she was a person who had an impact, and I just didn't want that to get lost.
Yeah.
In the bigger, more terrible story.
Now, in recent years, you had a tragedy of your own.
Yes.
You and your wife were on Coastal Highway and were in a pedestrian accident.
We were, yeah. So 5 years ago, it was late August. 5 years ago, we were crossing a crosswalk in Coastal Highway when a guy ran a red light and struck us. And my wife ended up at shock trauma with terrible injuries. And
it was touch and go for a long time.
It was really hard, yeah. There was a period where I just didn't know what was going to happen. I always say if the accident was 100%, Patty took about 90 of it, and I took about 10%. I went to the ER, was triaged and released immediately, where when she got into the ER, they immediately were like, no, we've got to go to shock trauma with this. And she ended up having facial reconstructive surgery. She'd had multiple surgeries on her leg. It was a really tough time. And that was actually one of the reasons why the book kind of took a while to come out, was in the middle of it. Right after I started, my mom and I...
So you had started it.
I had started the book in 2014, in 2015, my mom and I did a kidney transplant. My mom
Right.
needed a kidney, so
Right.
we had to do that. So I stopped writing the book for that, and then the following year, I was like, all right, I'll get back to the book. And my wife and I decided to get married, so you don't really write a book while you're planning a wedding. And then shortly after that, we had the accident, and so unfortunately, the book kind of got shelved because my life was kind of, my attention was called elsewhere. But then once I realized Patty was going to be okay, and we were gonna survive it, and everything was going to be put back as close to normal as possible, that's when I sort of went back and got to it, and then really pushed forward with it.
How's your mom doing?
She's doing great.
Okay, good.
She's doing really great. Yeah, so we did the kidney transplant 6 years ago.
What
and
is that like?
That's, honestly, it was, it was a wild time. It was very emotional because when my mom first started going into renal failure when I was in Alice's class, which was the thing that was kind of really bothering me, was that my mom was really, really sick, and my mom's this incredibly strong woman, so it wasn't like I could tell her, hey, Mom, I'm really afraid that, that things are not going well. She already knew that and was dealing with that, so Alice became the person that I could kind of get all that stuff out of, my system with. And so my mom actually started going into having renal trouble when I was in high school, but then she kind of got it corrected a little bit, was kind of fine for a while, and then the year after Alice died, my mom started into kidney failure again. And so it was a very emotional because we were watching her kind of stage down, and it was really difficult. And then it got to the point where they were kind of floating words like dialysis and transplant. And there were many times in that where I was like, man, I really wish I could talk to Alice again, because she had been the person who had talked to me the first time, And it eventually got to a point where they were like, yeah, you need a kidney transplant. And the cool part about it was so many people have loved ones that have heart disease or cancer or a stroke, and there's nothing you can do for them.
Right.
There's nothing except, love them and take care of them. But I was in a really unique position where, there was something I could do.
Right.
And I had I had 2 kidneys. I just needed one. And so I went through the testing process, and I was a perfect match for her. And so I was like, all right, well, let's do this. And my mom really struggled with it because, as a parent, she's like, I don't want to take something away from my kids. Parents, it's usually a one-way street. They're constantly giving, right?
Right.
And so she really struggled with the fact that it was going to be my kidney. And so as a writer, I was like, all right, well, let's stop talking. Language is important. So let's stop saying Stephanie's kidney, my kidney. Let's give it a name. And so we came up with Thelma and Louise. And I'm serious. So my mom got Louise, I kept Thelma, and so we started talking about Louise. Like, Louise is coming. Louise had a Caesar salad for lunch today. Louise went for a run today, and so it got to the point even the transplant staff, the doctors and nurses, were talking about Louise. And so that really kind of shifted the focus because we stopped saying Stephanie's kidney. I stopped saying my kidney. Everyone just started talking about Louise being the kidney. And I think that kind of helped because it's like a third party. It became like its own thing over here, not of me. And so it was emotional. It was hard. It was honestly one of the most emotional things that we've ever been through. I think as a family, it was really intense. But the flip side is, we got more time with my mom. We got more birthdays, more holidays. We got more of everything, and that was really the big piece of it. So, and she's doing great. And
I just think I would be tempted if my mother made me mad. I'd say I want my kidney back.
Well, here's what happens. On Mother's Day, I'm like, do I need to get you a gift? You kind of have a kidney. I don't know. Am I supposed to get you a Mother's Day card?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't think you have to anymore. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty sold at that point, but I don't know. I still get the card and the flowers for Mother's Day.
Tell me about your business too, Saltwater Media.
Yes. So going to Washington College and winning the award, the lady who won the award the year before me, she was on Oprah. She had a major book deal with Random House. So everyone my year thought we're all gonna have agents and publishing contracts, and then I win with stories about Greenbackville and Crisfield, and no one cares. And so I tried agents and all those sorts of things. I had my 15 minutes of fame, but ultimately did not get picked up, so I had to go into the workforce. And so at a certain point, I was like, the stories that I wrote really felt like they deserved to live. And so I was like, all right, so I'm going to try. I added another story to the collection. I'm like, all right, I'll just try agents and editors again. This was in like 2007 timeframe. And again, no agents, no editors, small presses, big presses. Nobody was really interested in what I was doing. But I felt like because the stories had won the largest undergraduate literary award in the country, I felt like they had some value.
Sure.
So I kind of was like, all right, well, I guess if this is going to live, I'm going to have to self-publish. And at the time, I had no idea what that meant. No idea whatsoever. So I just kind of stepped blindly into how to do things. And I did some things right, did some things maybe not so right. But I learned a lot in the process. So fast forward to 2012, the company I was working for was sold, and I just wasn't really happy in my job. And my mom, actually, she said, what do you want to do with your life? Like, what do you want to do? You gave this company 10 years. What do you want to do? And that was the first time that I gave voice to wanting to start a company to help authors do what I did. It's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. It's not transplant surgery. I mean, it's just a bunch of steps that have to be done in a particular order.
Right.
So, I told my mom, like, I'd like to make a company and kind of be the person I wish I had had. Somebody to, like, take me by the hand, explain what it is to self-publish, explain what reasonable expectations are, how much does it cost, how does it work. And my mom was like, great, why don't you put a business plan together? And I thought she was going to be like, no, why don't you go get a taco truck and, like, just do something, But she was really supportive, and she was like, just put a business plan together. So I did that and pulled a bunch of resources together. And in May of 2013, I opened Saltwater Media in Berlin. And we're a small independent publishing company based on the model of self-publishing. So my authors come to me with Microsoft Word document or maybe some photographs or images or whatever, and they say, I want to go from this to a book.
Right.
And so that's my job, and that's what I do every day. I work with authors predominantly on the Delmarva Peninsula, but I've got authors in Pennsylvania, and I've got one in New Mexico, all sorts of places, and we just help bring their works to life, and it's a really cool thing to be able to do. We've been doing that for 8.5 years now.
You mentioned Alice Davis would put lots of red on your writing.
Yes.
And my English teachers were the same way. And I would see other people who hadn't written anything as good as what I wrote, and they didn't have any red. And I was like, well, what's the deal? No, you're a writer guy, so we're going to judge you differently because you're going to continue to do this probably professionally.
Yes.
And you need to learn things right away.
Absolutely.
So the same thing was being applied to you. But are you able to do that with the people who come to you with their Word documents?
Yes, there's, I do wield a red pen, in honor. But no, Alice did do that. She did kind of bleed all over the page, but it was basically saying, like, I know you can do better. Stop settling. You can always do better. You can always push yourself. You can always improve the work that you're doing. And that's kind of the same thing that I bring to my clients is that, just because we're self-publishing, it doesn't mean that it needs to look like we went to Kinko's, right? We can have, like, professionally edited. We can have really nice covers. We can have well thought out and laid out interiors, all the pieces of the puzzle so that when you hand someone your book, you're proud of it, I'm proud of it, they're proud of it, that it stands up. And so I think that that's one of the things that I try to carry forward is that just because we're doing this, we can always elevate. We can always make things the best that thing can be. And that's really important to me with my clients. And
so when I finally get around to writing my book, I should be coming to you.
I would hope you would. I would hope you would.
But I was going to write about Greenbackville and Crisfield.
They're great little places, I mean, I'm not the authority on anything. So if you want to put it together, come see me.
Where can we get your book?
Sure. So, of course, the book is available on like Amazon, Barnes & Noble. However, I really, really, really would encourage people to support their local bookstores. So the Greyhound Bookstore in Berlin, Sundial Books in Chincoteague, the Book Plate in Chestertown, two bookstores that have been really great to me in the Delaware area, Bethany Beach Books and Browse About Books. Go visit your local bookstore and just say, hey, I heard about this title, because our bookstores are such cornerstones in our communities. And I mean, I know Amazon Prime is, everybody loves that, but really supporting local bookstores to me is really the best way. So
hold it up again so we know what to look for. Absolutely. Chasing Alice Davis. And what an amazing story. And that you were able to take this thing, and like I said, we were so afraid of sensationalizing it, but you wrote the behind the scenes story, how you were touched by her, and it's just amazing what you were able to do with it.
Well, thank you. I hope, I truly do hope that it stands as a positive commentary on her legacy. That's really important to me.
What's your next book?
So my next book, I'm working actually,
Isn't it fun to have to answer that question? What is my next book?
My next book, yeah. So right now I'm working on a book about the 1968 double homicide in Salisbury, the murder of Sheriff Graham, and the murder
Excellent.
Yes, that's my next one.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, now that's something that fascinates me. I've read everything about it, but I would never think to put it all together for anyone to read.
I guarantee you there's a lot you don't know.
I think I know everything because I've read all the trial stuff.
Right.
What's his name? And
Joseph Bartholomew.
Exactly, the manhunt. I've been and looked where the elevator was and where the trustee and the jail. I've seen all of it, but I've never thought to put it together.
Yeah. Well, I did. So actually,
this is a book I could be writing that you're stealing from me.
I mean, again, I'm not the authority on anything, but this was actually a story that I had picked up in 2010, the year before Alice, and I had actually done the Freedom of Information Act and got all the trial transcripts. I've got all the exhibits, so I have all of his psychiatric records.
Wow!
And that was a fascinating read.
He's a bad guy.
He was a very complicated, tragic, messed up kid.
And it was the classic gun in the cake thing, like in a movie.
It was like, in the movie, they put the file right in the cake, and this was like a gun in a candy box.
Yeah.
In a box of candy.
Amazing.
And, Sheriff Graham is on the front page of the paper that morning talking about how safe and secure his jail is. And then that night, he's shot and killed in the jail. But
back when the sheriff used to live at the jail.
Right, yeah.
In the courthouse.
We used to live right next door. But I think what happened for me was, when you lose someone that you have loved to this, the way that I want to approach these stories is a bit different now. I tend to kind of see the murder part as almost like a fulcrum point. Like, how did we get to that point? And then once we hit that point, like, what do we learn coming out of that? And so there's a lot in that story. It's tentatively titled A Winter of Blood, as the tentative title. But there's so much that happened. There's so much with the politics of Salisbury, who Graham was as a man, who Bartholomew was as a young person. Things that we can say about mental health then that sort of still apply now. Things we can say about prison systems then that still sort of apply now. There's the families, the Eastern Shore, Western Shore, H.L. Mencken vibe, that was still prevalent. So there's so much about the story. There's so many layers to that onion that to me are just very interesting. So that's what I'm working on now.
Stephanie Fowler, thanks for being here today. I could talk to you all day about this stuff. That's exciting.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you've just triggered a book idea for me, which I need to start writing before you get there.
All right. Well, I won't. Again, I'm not the authority on anything. You go ahead and knock it out.
She's Stephanie Fowler from Saltwater Media. She's got this great book, Chasing Alice, about Alice Davis and the tragic way her life ended, but the inspiration that she provided to so many people. And we're just thrilled Stephanie was with us here today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.